Joan, could you explain to me the charge that he did plead guilty to?
Today, Kurt acknowledged what he has acknowledged from the very beginning, which is that he deleted a string of text messages with a close personal friend that included almost entirely personal information, and that he did that without first getting BP's permission. That is what Kurt Mix acknowledged today.
And the position is that it had nothing to do with the actual reporting of the damages caused by the oil spill.
That is correct, and I would be happy to refer you to the string of text messages, which is in the public record. As you will see, the messages include lots of information about lunch and yoga and sick pets and family vacations. There are only glancing references to the work that Kurt Mix was doing with his close friend Wilson Araby, and there are no important pieces of information in those text messages at all, and nothing that wasn't available in all of the materials that Kurt Mix saved and turned over, 10,000 records in total. Nothing about the Macondo response that wasn't at the same time live streaming on cable news.
And Mr. Araby is the contractor referred to in the superseding bill?
That is correct.
And is it a contention? I haven't seen the factual basis, so forgive the question if it's. Is it a contention that this was an inadvertent action on Mr. Mix's part, or just one that was taken because it didn't really have anything to do with the oil?
Mr. Mix has always acknowledged that he deleted the text message string, and he acknowledged here in federal court today that he intentionally deleted that string. As I mentioned, it was a string with his very close friend, Wilson Araby, and the string includes almost entirely personal information. And Kurt Mix is the person who, when a question first arose, he immediately directed and hired a forensic examiner to recover the messages, and he voluntarily, immediately, back in the fall of 2011, turned them over to the Department of Justice.
Did any of the messages speak to the amount of oil that was leaking out of the well?
None of the messages in the Wilson Araby string spoke even remotely to that. The closest comment was during Top Kill, which was live streaming on CNN. Kurt Mix observed that BP was taking a spanking. And of course, anybody who was watching television during Top Kill was thinking the very same thing and seeing the very same thing, that well was giving BP a very rough time, and BP was indeed taking a spanking from the Macondo well.
And if you don't mind my asking, are you all furnished by BP? Did BP stand with him through this, or has he been on his own on this?
BP did reimburse Kurt's counsel for their legal fees. In a case like this, a 4-year investigation and prosecution, the Department of Justice throwing all of its resources into this matter, it would not be possible to defend a case like this and to achieve an outcome such as we have achieved here today, affirming Kurt's innocence, without that financial support. I know that Kurt is very grateful to have had that support, and we on his behalf have been very grateful as well.
But he no longer works for BP, correct?
He no longer works for BP, that is correct.
You say what he does now?
Kurt Mix continues to work as an engineer. He also is very involved in a number of other projects, including projects, renovation projects on his home and other matters, and he looks forward to getting back fully into the career he has enjoyed for many, many years as an engineer.
Talk at all about your impression of how this case fits in line with the other 3 men from BP who were charged in relation to the disaster?
I'm Kurt's lawyer. I can only speak to Kurt's case, but what I will say is that with respect to Mr. Rainey, who was prosecuted in this courthouse, Mr. Rainey and Kurt Mix together today stand vindicated of any charge that either ever acted ever acted to obstruct justice. And so that is something that both Mr. Rainey and Mr. Mix have been able fully to put behind them with the outcomes in these cases.
Some have speculated that both Mr. Mix and Mr. Rainey were fall guys in this larger disaster for the government that they took the fall for. Do you feel as though that they're both been vindicated at this point, that kind of speaks to that at all?
I do think that Kurt Mix has been vindicated. I also think that the important thing about Kurt Mix is that he was an engineer who was on the front lines of the Macondo response effort. He came in one day after the explosion. He'd had nothing to do with that well before, and Kurt Mix gave his life over to stopping that well. It became his obsession. He worked for almost 90 days around the clock, 1 day off to go to his stepson's graduation from college. And Kurt Mix, together with some of the finest engineers in the world, as he said, made an enormous contribution to bringing an extraordinary, epic environmental disaster to a close. Thank you.
The judge alluded to him being advised by BP lawyers not to delete any text messages whatsoever. Did he not hear that? Was that a truthful statement? Did he not hear that, or did he think that this was totally unrelated and be safe in doing it?
Kurt Mix did receive legal hold notices, as did everyone else who had worked on the response. Kurt Mix did an extraordinary job of preserving all of his records. Kurt Mix wanted his records to be preserved. He wanted them to be organized. He wanted them to be available to anyone who was interested, primarily because he wanted lessons to be learned from the Macondo response so that there could never be another Macondo. So Kurt Mix has meticulous records, over 10,000 records that he saved. Kurt Mix did understand the hold notice. Kurt Mix did intentionally delete the message that was almost entirely personal with his close friend. He was not authorized by BP. His error was in not seeking BP's permission under the terms of this agreement.
Just to be clear, was it a single text message or was it a string of text messages that
It was a text message conversation, so it was a string of messages that had been exchanged over time with Mr. Arabi.
Very good.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can you spell your name for us real